provide another presentation. Amen. To set the tone for our honoree and also our keynote for today. Let me just, in the essence of time, to say that before us today is an extraordinary woman, a Renaissance woman, a woman who is indeed a lover of Africa, a product of Zimbabwe, and who is married to a Ghanaian, but indeed she is the greatest ambassador that I know that really does represent all of Africa and the diaspora in an extraordinary way. And I'm talking about Her Excellency, Dr. Arikana Chiambuyi-Quayle. Can we give her a hand as she prepares to come this morning? And so I've asked Lillian in order to prepare us for this, but as a matter of fact, let me do this now, that we have a gift for you because of your extraordinary work on behalf of Africa and for the diaspora. So I'm going to go over here and get it. You can remain there, Ambassador, but I just want you to know that this extraordinary work of art is from an African-American woman, and it's called A Sisterly Love. And I want everybody to be able to see it right now. This is for you. Presented to Her Excellency Dr. Arikana Chiambuyi-Quayle on this day from the Pan-African Collective. We love you. So we're going to hold on to that for you. So Lillian, why don't you come and give this poem, and then we're going to turn it over. Yes. Oh, having you come forward. Oh, the flowers are for her as well. Amen. All right. So Lillian, won't you come? And then we'll hear from Her Excellency, Dr. Arikana Chiambuyi-Quayle.
Good afternoon again. The poem I wasn't going to do is a little longer, so I'm just going to do a short one because I think we need to pay tribute to the ancestors who come before us. So this poem is entitled Libation for the Ancestors. I pour this libation into fertile earth. I pour this libation to honor the ancestors' birth. For the African ancestors known and unknown, I pour this libation for Africans forced from their home. I pour this libation for the ancestors' land, the land of the indigenous African man, the land on which the African was born, the African homeland from which they were torn. I pour this libation for the ancestors to come. I acknowledge that we all come from the original one, the original indigenous African woman and man. Their union as one is the reason I stand. So I pour this libation for who I am, and for the ancestors, I raise my hands.
Ladies and gentlemen, Her Excellency, Dr. Arikana Chiambuyi-Quayle. Won't you stand and let's receive her this day. Give the Lord a round. Amen. And clap of praise.
Thank you all so very much for being patient. I truly appreciate you. I have to say, I swam as fast as I could across the Atlantic. A few delays, I met a few hippos and crocodiles, but we fought through it. Thank you again, the plane landed safely. Initially, the plan was to change at the airport, but when I looked at myself, I'm like, this is not gonna work. The clothes were all wrinkled, and so I had to rush home, change, and find a new set of clothing. So my apologies for being late. To their excellencies in the room, I see my sister from Ghana, to Reverend Weaver, the other Reverend. Yes, my apologies for forgetting the name. My brothers and sisters, I bring you greetings from our 55 African heads of states and your 1.27 billion brothers and sisters on the continent. I just arrived from Ethiopia, where we were continuing to address the issues to do the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which, as you all know, it's a project, it's a program that is going to take us where we need to be as a united front of Mother Africa's children. My name is Arikana Chiambuyi, and I'm the African ambassador, AU ambassador to the United States. I was sent here on two main missions. One, to promote Africa in the Americas, and secondly, to bring African children home. That one was made very clear by Madam Zuma and re-echoed by the current chairman of the African Union, Moussa Faki Mahamat. And it is reiterated every time the African heads of states meet, which is twice a year for the summit. That is underscored repeatedly. Because the reality is, if Africa is to move forward and take its rightful place on the world stage, it must include its children in the diaspora. The African Union defines African diaspora as all people of African descent living outside Africa. Those who came across the Atlantic in shackles, and those who came in search of greener pastures. Regardless of how we got here, we must go back home. Let me take you back to a decision that was made by a group of men with the intent of exploiting our Africa. In order for us to understand our Africa, in order for us to take our Africa to its rightful place on the stage, we must first understand, how did we, as Black people, end up where we are today? Let me start by underscoring that our conditions, our status as Black people in the world, no matter where you encounter us, is unacceptable. And it has been unacceptable for far too long. And if our conditions are to change in the world as Black people, it's gonna take us. Naturally, we can't expect those who put us where we are to do something about it. Let me start with your Africa as we have it today. Because you need to know what happened. How did we get here? Because quite often we are meant to be instruments of our own self-destruction, and we don't even realize it. So the journey to taking Africa where Africa needs to be, it starts with you and I understanding, how did we get here? I'm going to bring the story a little bit forward, even though we know it goes back hundreds of centuries before. But I'm going to start with 1884, which is when the colonizers, after traveling around the continent for centuries and finding some of the most amazing, powerful kingdoms in Africa, and realizing that unless they come together in a unified way, conquering the Africans was mission impossible. Let me take it home for example. If you look at some of the most vicious battles of resistance that were led by Africans, the Africans, us fighting with bows and arrows, and they were fighting with their guns, we still defeated them. You look at the famous Battle of Usanglawana, where the Zulus massacred every single standing British soldier with their bows and arrows. The famous female leader, Ghanaian woman, Nana Asantua, she led a resistance against the British single-handedly when the men were trying to back down. Nana Asantua said, absolutely not.
Oh my God.
And she led a battalion that destroyed every single standing British. These are stories that nobody is telling us. That there was vicious resistance, that we're made to believe that those who were sold in slavery, there was no resistance. No, that's another chapter, and I shall go back there. But it is a story that is propelled to keep us divided, trying to highlight that the suffering of those who were sold into slavery was worse than the suffering of those who stayed behind. Let me remind you of the carnage that was left behind by Leopold of Belgium, where 75% of the Belgians Africans were killed by Leopold. Many had their hands cut off simply because they could. It gets even better. If you go to the palace in Belgium today, at the entrance to the palace, you will see 2 hands depicting what King Leopold did to the Belgians. To this day, nobody protests the statues of the hands and what they signify. Let's take you to Namibia, where the Germans ordered complete annihilation of all tribes simply because they were resisting. Let's take you a little closer to home, South Africa and Zimbabwe. And the story goes on. So for those who choose to divide us by telling us that for the purposes of conversations, the African Americans suffered more than the continental Africans, they are wrong and don't buy into that narrative. We are in this Titanic together. Changing seats is not serving you because this boat is going down unless we come together. So 1884, the colonizers, my brother here, the Frenchman, after stealing land from this village, and then my sister here, the British, comes in and steals the same land that he has stolen. And here comes Spain, steals the same land that had been stolen by Belgium. And before you know it, the colonizers were beginning to fight over who stole what of the stolen goods. So afraid that they were getting ready to have European war on the African soil, the then king, rather German Chancellor, Bismarck, called his sidekick, King Leopold, and said, listen, we have a problem. We are getting ready to have a war, European war on the African soil. Let's do something about it. Let's come together and design a way to make sure that Africa and its people are forever defeated. Let's organize our looting of Africa. That is the single reason why they met during the Berlin Conference of 1884. From November of 1884 to February of 1885, they sat in a big room, 14 of them, 14 countries. And they had a big old map of Africa on the other side of the table to specifically strategize on how to effectively defeat and dominate the African people. The closer the tribes were, the more countries that came out of those tribes. The more the tribes didn't get along, they put them together and made a bigger country out of that. Let them keep fighting. The rule of divide and conquer was so. Furthermore,